Rain hammered against the windows of my parents' Seattle living room, matching the storm brewing inside. My mother, Danielle, twisted her ring nervously before delivering the strike. "We accessed your savings," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "We used $105,000 to help your sister buy her dream cottage for her Airbnb business." From the armchair, my sister Gabrielle smirked, swirling her wine. "You don't have a single penny left, do you?" I looked at the zero balance on my banking app. But instead of screaming, I burst into uncontrollable laughter. Because they didn't know I had personally condemned that house 3 months ago. They hadn't just stolen my money. They had bought a death trap. Have you ever had family steal from you and call it help? Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. My apartment wasn't a home. It was a tactical position. For the last 5 years, while my sister Gabrielle was posting photos of bottomless mimosas and complaining about the stress of curating her lifestyle brand, I was living in a retrofitted industrial loft in the gritty part of Seattle's Georgetown district. It smelled of wet concrete and diesel fumes from the rail yard next door. In the winter, the single-pane windows let in so much cold air I could see my breath while I reviewed blueprints at 3 in the morning. I ate instant ramen 5 nights a week, not because I couldn't cook, but because cooking took time and time was billable. My parents saw my life as sad. They called it unbalanced. They didn't understand that I was building something. I am a structural engineer. I understand load paths, tension, and compression. I know that if you want to build a skyscraper that scrapes the clouds, you have to spend years digging a hole deep enough to hold the foundation. That was what I was doing. Digging. I was saving 70% of my post-tax income. Every bonus, every overtime hour, every freelance inspection fee went into the war chest. My goal was simple: $500,000, the exact capital required to launch my own firm, buy my own equipment, and secure the insurance needed to bid on municipal contracts. I hit that number 2 months ago. But I didn't tell them. I didn't tell anyone, except my mentor, a senior partner at my current firm named Elias. When I showed him my financials a year ago, he gave me the piece of advice that saved my life. He told me, "Rachel, wealth is like a structural load. If you put it all on one column and that column fails, the whole building comes down. If your family knows you have $500,000 liquid, you become their bank. You need a decoy." So, I built a financial partition. I kept one account at the local credit union my parents had used since I was a child. I kept the balance there hovering around $100,000. A significant amount, enough to look like I was doing well enough to be a temptation. But the real capital, the $400,000 that represented my freedom, my sweat, and 16-hour days, standing in freezing mud, inspecting rebar, that was moved to a high-yield trust account at a national bank they didn't even know I used. I called it the decoy protocol. It was a stress test for their integrity. I honestly hoped they would never fail it. I hoped that the $105,000 sitting in that visible account would just sit there, a silent testament to my hard work. But as I sat in that living room watching Gabrielle smirk, I realized Elias was right. They hadn't seen my savings as my safety net. They saw it as a resource to be harvested. They saw my sacrifice not as discipline but as hoarding. And in their twisted logic, stealing, it wasn't theft. It was redistribution. They took the bait. They swallowed it whole. And now they were going to choke on it. The laughter died in my throat, replaced by a cold clinical curiosity. I wiped the tears of mirth from my eyes and looked at them. Really looked at them. There was no guilt in the room. There was tension, yes, but not the shame of thieves caught in the act. My mother, Danielle, was smoothing the fabric of the sofa, waiting for me to calm down so she could explain why this was actually a good thing. My father, Brian, poured himself a drink, his movements stiff but righteous. I asked the question, my voice flat. "You stole $105,000. Why?" My mother sighed, the sound of a parent disappointed by a child's selfishness. "It's not stealing, Rachel," she said gently. "It's reallocating. You have a good job. You're single. Your expenses are low. Gabrielle has a wedding coming up and she and Zachary need a start. We just moved the family capital to where it was needed most." I stared at her, and suddenly the architecture of their morality became crystal clear. In engineering, we study stress distribution. You take weight from the strong points to support the weak points. But in human relationships, that logic is toxic. I realized in that moment that they didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a resource. It is a concept called narcissistic extension. To them, I am not a separate entity with my own dreams, my own hunger, or my own rights. I am an appendage. I am an extension of their ego. If I have money, it's not my money. It's the family's money, which means it's their money. Taking from me wasn't theft in their eyes. It was simply moving assets from the right pocket to the left pocket. I was the strong limb, so I was obligated to carry the weight of the atrophied one. My father chimed in, emboldened by my silence. We did it for you too, Rachel. You hoard money. It's unhealthy. You live like a pauper when you could be helping your sister build an empire. This house is going to generate passive income for all of us. I looked at Zachary, Gabrielle's fiancé. He was leaning against the mantel wearing a vest that cost more than my monthly food budget. He smiled a slick salesman grin. It's a no-brainer, Rachel, he said. The location is trendy. We put it on the short-term rental market, charge $400 a night, and we'll refinance in 6 months. The equity alone will pay you back. It's basically free money. I felt a twitch in my eye. Passive income, equity, buzzwords from a man who had never held a shovel. I asked the next logical question. The house was listed for $150,000. My account only had $105. Where did the rest come from? My father hesitated, the glass freezing halfway to his mouth. We leveraged the retirement fund, he muttered. We took a loan against the 401k. It's fine. The cash flow will cover the payments. My blood ran cold. They hadn't just stolen my bait. They had mortgaged their own survival. They had taken the safety net for their old age and tied it to an anchor. And they had done it all for a house that I knew for a fact was structurally compromised. I looked at Zachary. Did you check the zoning laws? I asked softly. Did you get a structural inspection? He waved his hand dismissively. We waived the inspection to sweeten the offer. And zoning is just a suggestion in that neighborhood. Everyone does it. It's about the vibe, Rachel. The house has good bones. Good bones. I almost laughed again. The house had osteoporosis. But looking at their defiant, expectant faces, I realized that warning them was useless. They wouldn't believe me. They would think I was jealous. They would think I was trying to sabotage Gabrielle's success because I was bitter. They had built a reality where I was the villain, and they were the visionaries. If I told them the roof was about to cave in, they would accuse me of making it rain. So, I made a choice. I wouldn't fight them. I wouldn't scream. I would let gravity do the work. I stood up. I didn't ask for the money back. I didn't demand an apology. I picked up my purse and walked to the door. Where are you going? My mother called out, her voice shrill. We haven't discussed the renovation budget. I turned back one last time. There is no budget, I said, and there is no me. You spent my savings. You spent your retirement. You bought the house. Now you get to live in it. I closed the door on their confusion, walked into the rain, and got into my 10-year-old sedan. I didn't drive home. I drove to the scene of the crime. I pulled up to the address listed on the inspection report I had filed away months ago. It was a Victorian house perched on a hill in Queen Anne overlooking the Puget Sound. From the street it was charming. A fresh coat of slate gray paint, white trim, a wraparound porch that screamed Instagram moment. I could see why Gabrielle wanted it. It looked like the kind of place where lifestyle influencers drank oat milk lattes and talked about manifesting abundance. But I wasn't looking at the paint. I was looking at the grade of the slope. I was looking at the retaining wall that was buckling outward by 3 inches, a subtle curve invisible to the untrained eye, but screaming danger to mine. I pulled my work tablet from my bag and opened the file. 2408 Viewpoint Drive. Structural assessment failed. Foundation settlement exceeding safe limits. Recommendation: immediate stabilization or condemnation. I had inspected this house 4 months ago for a commercial investment firm. They had walked away the moment they saw my report. The repair costs were estimated at $200,000 minimum, and even then it was a gamble. The soil was unstable. The house was slowly, inexorably sliding toward the street. My parents had bought it. Zachary had waived the inspection. They had sunk everything they had, my stolen money, their retirement, their reputation, into a building that was physically incapable of supporting their dreams. I sat there in the rain, watching the lights glow warmly in the windows. Gabrielle was probably inside right now, measuring for curtains, completely unaware that the floor beneath her feet was ticking like a bomb. For a moment, the old instinct flared. The instinct to fix it. To run inside, show them the report, tell them to get out, to sue the seller, to do something. That was my role, wasn't it? The fixer. The safety net. The one who caught them when they fell. But then I remembered my mother's voice. It's reallocating. I remembered my father's face as he poured his drink. You hoard money. If I warned them now, they would blame me. They would say I was jealous. They would say I was trying to ruin Gabrielle's happiness. They would demand I pay for the repairs because, after all, I was the engineer. I was the one with the resources. I put the tablet away. I started the car. The windshield wipers swished back and forth, a rhythmic, hypnotic sound. I wasn't going to save them. I wasn't going to be the foundation anymore. I was going to let them experience the consequences of gravity. Gravity is fair. Gravity doesn't care about your intentions or your dreams or your family dynamics. Gravity only cares about physics, and the physics of this situation were terminal. I drove back to my loft. The concrete floor was cold, the air smelled of rain and metal, but for the first time in years it felt warm. It felt safe. I opened a bottle of cheap wine and sat on my second-hand couch. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just waited. I knew the timeline. The rainy season had just begun. The soil would saturate. The pressure on that retaining wall would increase. It was only a matter of time. And unlike them, I had nowhere to be but here watching the radar. 3 weeks later, the first domino fell. It wasn't the foundation, not yet. It was the bureaucracy. Zachary, the genius real estate mogul who claimed zoning laws were just suggestions, found out that the city of Seattle treats them as mandates. A code enforcement officer slapped a bright orange stop work order on the front door. The neighborhood was zoned exclusively for long-term residential use. Short-term rentals were strictly prohibited. The passive income stream they had leveraged their entire future on had just evaporated before a single guest could check in. Then the rain came back. A relentless soaking drizzle that saturated the hillside. The basement of the Victorian dream house flooded with 6 inches of muddy sludge. They needed money. They needed $10,000 for a sump pump and drainage mitigation and another $5,000 for legal fees to fight the city. But they were tapped out. They had spent my $105,000. They had spent the loan from the retirement fund. They were drowning, and like drowning people, they started thrashing, looking for anything to grab onto to keep their heads above water. I was at my desk reviewing a load-bearing calculation for a bridge retrofit when my phone vibrated. A security notification from my primary bank. The real one. Alert: multiple failed login attempts. Account locked for security. I stared at the screen. The IP address was local. It was coming from a coffee shop 3 blocks from the house on Queen Anne. They were trying to hack me. They had realized that the $105,000 was too specific, too neat. They had guessed correctly that I had more. And instead of cutting their losses, instead of admitting defeat, they were trying to brute force their way into my life savings. They weren't just greedy family members anymore. They were active threats. They were criminals. I didn't call them. I called a lawyer. Not a family mediator, but a shark who specialized in asset protection and civil litigation. His name was Marcus, and he worked out of a glass office that smelled of expensive leather and intimidation. I laid out the evidence, the text messages admitting to the initial theft, the inspection report proving the house was doomed, the security logs showing the attempted breach of my trust account. Marcus looked at the file and whistled low. "They are desperate," he said. "They are facing financial ruin, and they think you are the only lifeline. Why don't they just stop? Why don't they sell the house at a loss and save what's left?" I looked out the window at the gray skyline. "It is the sunk cost fallacy," I told him. "In economics and in engineering, it is the irrational desire to continue investing in a failed project simply because you have already invested so much. They have put their reputation, their retirement, and their pride into this house. To stop now would be to admit that they were wrong, that they are thieves, and that they are incompetent. They cannot psychologically afford to fold the hand, so they are doubling down. They are throwing good money, and now my money after bad. They will not stop until they hit the bottom." Marcus nodded, his pen scratching across a legal pad. "Then we help them hit the bottom faster. We drafted a cease and desist order regarding the digital intrusion. But the real weapon was the formal demand letter. We demanded the immediate return of the $105,000, classifying it not as a loan, but as unauthorized conversion of funds, legal speak for theft. We gave them 7 days to pay or face a civil lawsuit that would freeze their remaining assets. I knew they didn't have the money. I knew they couldn't pay. But that wasn't the point. The point was to establish the timeline. The point was to make sure that when the house finally collapsed, they couldn't claim I was an accomplice. I was a creditor, and I was coming to collect. The storm hit on a Tuesday night. Not a drizzle this time, but an atmospheric river event, a deluge that turned Seattle streets into rivers and hillsides into mudslides. I sat in my loft listening to the rain pummel the metal roof, and I knew. The timeline had accelerated. The soil saturation point had been reached. At 3 in the morning, my phone rang. It wasn't my family. It was the emergency contact number for my engineering license, which was public record. A frantic neighbor on Queen Anne reporting a loud cracking sound and a shifting retaining wall at 2408 Viewpoint Drive. I didn't go. I couldn't. It wasn't my jurisdiction, and I wasn't the engineer of record. I went back to sleep, but it was fitful. By morning, the news had broken. A red tag had been slapped on the front door by the city inspector. Do not enter. Unsafe to occupy. The retaining wall had failed. The foundation had shifted 4 inches to the west. The house was no longer a home. It was a landslide in progress. They showed up at my loft at noon. They were soaked, shivering, and looked like ghosts. My mother, Danielle, was weeping openly, her mascara running in dark streaks. My father, Brian, looked 10 years older, his righteous posture gone, replaced by a slump of defeat. Gabrielle was silent, her eyes wide and terrified. Zachary was pacing, muttering about insurance, about lawsuits, about how this wasn't fair. I opened the heavy steel door but didn't invite them in. I stood in the doorway, a physical barrier between my world and their wreckage. Rachel, my mother sobbed, reaching for my hand. I pulled back. We lost it. We lost the house. The city kicked us out. We have nowhere to go. We need you to sign off, Zachary blurted out, stepping forward. He looked manic. The city inspector said we need a structural engineer to design a remediation plan. If you sign off on a temporary shoring plan just on paper, we can get the red tag lifted. We can sell it to a developer. We can get our money back. We just need a signature. You're a PE. You can do it. I looked at them. They weren't asking for shelter. They weren't asking for forgiveness. They were asking me to commit fraud. They were asking me to risk my license, my career, and my integrity to patch the hole they had dug for themselves. My father spoke up, his voice cracking. Please, Rachel. It's our retirement. It's everything. If we don't sell, we're bankrupt. We leverage the house in Naperville too. We'll lose that one as well. We'll have nothing. The sheer scale of their ruin was breathtaking. They had bet the farm, the tractor, and the livestock on a house that was sliding into the sea, and they still thought I was the resource. They still thought I existed to be harvested. No, I said. The word hung in the damp air, heavy and final. What? Zachary stared at me. You just have to sign a paper. It's a formality. It's not a formality, I said, my voice cold as the concrete under my feet. It's negligence, it's fraud, and it's impossible. You can't shore up that house. The foundation is gone. The soil is liquefied. I won't sign. I won't lose my license to save you from your own greed. You have to, Gabrielle screamed, finally finding her voice. You have money, you have resources, you're the reason we're in this mess. If you had just given us the money willingly, we wouldn't have had to leverage the retirement fund. This is your fault. The audacity was so pure it was almost impressive. I looked at my sister, the golden child who was now tarnished beyond repair. I didn't scream back. I didn't argue. I just reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a folded document. I'm not the reason, I said. And I'm not the solution. I handed the paper to my father. What is this? He asked, his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold it. It's the inspection report, I said. From 4 months ago. I inspected that house for a client. I condemned it then. I knew it was going to fall. I knew it the moment you told me you bought it. The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the rain and the distant wail of a siren. They looked at me with horror. Not because I had caused the collapse, but because I had watched it happen. I had stood by and let them walk off the cliff. You knew, my mother whispered. You knew and you didn't tell us. You stole from me, I said. You treated me like an ATM. You told me I was hoarding. You told me I was selfish. I decided to let you be right. I let you have the house. I let you have the consequences. I stepped back and put my hand on the door handle. Go to a shelter. Go to a hotel. I don't care. But get off my property. I slammed the door shut. The sound of the latch clicking into place was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a load-bearing wall finally doing its job. I listened to them pounding on the metal door for 10 minutes. They screamed. They begged. They bargained. Zachary promised to pay me back triple once the market turned. Gabrielle cried about how she was going to be homeless. My father invoked the fourth commandment. My mother just wailed my name. I stood on the other side of the steel, my hand resting on the cold bolt, feeling the vibrations of their desperation, but I didn't turn the lock. I wasn't their daughter in that moment. I was a structural firewall. I was containing the damage to ensure it didn't spread to the rest of the building. The next morning, the process server found them at a Motel 6 on the outskirts of the city. He handed them a thick manila envelope. It wasn't a check. It was a civil lawsuit for $105,000 plus legal fees and punitive damages for conversion of funds. I knew I would never see a dime. They were destitute. They had leveraged everything they owned on a lie. But the judgment wasn't about the money. It was a legal retaining wall. It ensured that for the next 10 years they could never open a line of credit, never buy a home, and never come to me for a loan without facing a court order. It was the only way to ensure they would stay away. The Victorian house was bulldozed 2 months later. The city declared it an imminent public hazard. I drove by the empty lot once. It was just a patch of mud and weeds on the side of a hill. The dream had been erased, returned to the earth that refused to support it. 6 months later, I sat in a corner office on the 18th floor of a building in downtown Seattle. The sign on the frosted glass door read Bedrock Engineering. It was my firm. My name was on the lease. My capital had paid for the ergonomic chairs, the high-end drafting tables, and the payroll for the 3 junior engineers I had just hired. I had done it. I had dug the hole, poured the concrete, and raised the steel, and I had done it alone. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. There was a photograph there, tucked face down under a stack of invoices. It was from a family vacation 10 years ago. We were all smiling. We looked like a unit. I picked it up and stared at it, and for a moment the silence in the office felt heavy. There is a specific kind of pain that comes with cutting off your family. It is the grief of the living. When someone dies, you mourn the loss of their future. But when you cut someone off, you mourn the loss of their history. You mourn the version of them that you desperately wanted to exist. I looked at my parents in the photo, and I realized I wasn't missing them. I was missing the safety net they were supposed to be. I was missing the idea of a mother who protected me, and a father who provided for me. But those people in the photo were ghosts. They never really existed. The reality was a parasite that viewed me as a host. In engineering, if a structural member is compromised by rot, you don't paint over it. You cut it out. You remove it completely, no matter how painful the extraction, because if you leave it, the rot spreads. It compromises the integrity of the whole system. I had to amputate my own family to save my life. It hurt. It felt like a phantom limb, an ache where something used to be. But as I looked around my office at the solid walls, the clean lines, the structure I had built with my own hands, I knew the trade was worth it. I put the photo back in the drawer and closed it. I wasn't broken. I was load-bearing. I turned back to my computer where a new set of blueprints was waiting for review. I had buildings to raise, I had foundations to pour, and unlike the house on the hill, mine were built on bedrock. If you've ever had to rebuild your life from the ground up after a betrayal, share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about resilience and justice.